Welcome, everyone. I'm Lorelei Tangi, University Librarian at UC Irvine. We are offering a live transcription of this event, which you can turn on at the bottom of your screen by selecting closed captioning or view the full transcript. I'd like to start today's program with UCI Libraries' acknowledgement of our presence on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Ahashiman and Tongva peoples. We are so pleased you could join us for tonight's program, A Journey Through the Holocaust. This program is part of an event series in conjunction with the Americans and the Holocaust, a traveling exhibition for libraries that's co-sponsored by the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum and the American Library Association. Now, this exhibition examines the motives, the pressures, and fears that shaped Americans' responses to Nazism, war, and genocide from 1933 to 1945. UCI Libraries is one of 50 libraries in the United States and the only Southern California site selected to display this traveling exhibition. And it will be available for viewing until March 9th in the Jack Langston Library at UC Irvine. We're so excited to bring this exhibition and related events to UCI and the broader Orange County community. I'd like to extend a special thank you to the Jewish Federation of Orange County for their support of tonight's program. And at this time, it is my great pleasure to invite Lisa Armoni, Chief Impact Officer and Director of the Rose Project of the Jewish Federation of Orange County, to share a few words.
Thank you, Lorelei. It's truly an honor to be with you here this evening and with your team. Jewish Federation is so grateful for our partnership with UCI Libraries on this program and on the exhibition in its totality. You and your colleagues have undertaken a project of great magnitude, which encompasses not just the exhibition, but also the meaningful programs that will accompany it, and providing access to the community over the next month so that people can see this exhibition for themselves. I want to acknowledge the many partners whose invaluable contributions have made all of this possible, including, of course, the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum and the American Library Association, UCI's Jewish Studies Program and Office of Inclusive Excellence, my colleagues at the Orange County Holocaust Survivor Program, and U.S. Representative Katie Porter, who was really the spark behind what ended up being a 3-year journey that culminates this month. I can recall sitting in Congresswoman Porter's Washington office back in 2018 when she first shared her idea of bringing the exhibition to Orange County. We were really excited, really pleased, and just wanted to jump in and help her make her idea a reality. The exhibition aligns with Jewish Federation's work to enhance Holocaust education and to support the well-being of local Holocaust survivors. Today, close to 300 Holocaust survivors live in Orange County, and through the generosity of our local community and our partnership with Jewish Family Service of San Diego, Jewish Federation provides critical funds for financial assistance and services for close to 200 of these survivors. This support enables them to age with dignity in their homes and with their cherished social networks. With regard to Holocaust education, this exhibition could not be more timely. Only 77 years since the liberation of the Auschwitz death camp, and despite the incontrovertibility of the Holocaust historical record, studies are showing us more and more that basic knowledge of the Holocaust is significantly deficient, particularly among young people. A 2020 national survey conducted by the Conference on Jewish Material Claims Against Germany found that 63% of respondents didn't know that 6 million Jews were murdered in the Holocaust. 1 in 10 had never recalled hearing the word Holocaust before. And shockingly, 11% of respondents believed that Jews caused the Holocaust. This lack of knowledge and outright distortion is compounded by the continued pervasiveness of Holocaust denial and the anti-Semitism that fuels it. At a time of heightened polarization in our country, we're witnessing disturbingly high levels of anti-Semitic incidents and crimes, along with other forms of hate-motivated attacks on people based on their faith, ethnicity, national origin, gender and sexual identity, and disability. That's why this exhibition is so important right now. According to renowned scholar and presidential nominee, Dr. Deborah Lipstadt, who will speak to our community very soon in conjunction with the exhibition, when you learn the history of the Holocaust, you are not simply learning about the past. These lessons remain relevant today in order to understand not only anti-Semitism, but also all of the other isms of society. There is real danger to letting them fade. In other words, according to Dr. Lipstadt, Holocaust education is not just about anti-Semitism or the Jewish community, but about the dangers that can afflict all societies. We endeavor to learn the universally relevant lessons of the Holocaust because they allow us to recognize the fragility of our societies and of the rights of those who inhabit them. And we become compelled to reinforce the values that protect and preserve free society. Holocaust education helps us see the danger of scapegoating and searching for simple answers to complex problems, and the unthinkable consequences of the abuse of power and the use of fear, indifference, and resentment in social and political relations. And through Holocaust education, we witness what happens when societies condone or turn a blind eye to discrimination, dehumanization, racism, and intolerance directed at those living within them. Thankfully, there are many resources available to support Holocaust education in our schools and communities, and this exhibition is just one of them. Tonight's program is a chance for us to bear witness to the lived experience of one Holocaust survivor, and I want to thank her so much for being here to share that story. We are going to be offered a chance to share her story with others. And the exhibition gives us opportunity to look within ourselves and our society and to consider the implications of our priorities, our attitudes, and our biases. So I want to thank you all for being here this evening, and I hope you'll come to UCI to see the exhibition and take advantage of this incredible opportunity that our community has been given. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lisa, for your wonderful remarks and your remarks about how important the exhibition and tonight's event is. So now I would like to introduce tonight's honored speaker. Solange Pullman-Fisch was born in 1935 in Sedan, a town in northeastern France located near the Belgian border. And in 1940, when Germany began to invade France, Solange and her mother fled Nancy, the northeastern town in France where they resided. So tonight, Solange will be sharing her story, her journey through the Holocaust, which began at the tender age of 5. And after the presentation, there will be a Q&A session. So welcome, Solange.
Thank you. And thank you, UCI, for inviting me. I would like to tell you my story and the story of many very courageous people who saved me. I was born in France, and it starts when the Germans invaded France, and I was about 5 years old. And like millions of others in my life, we were being threatened, simply because we were of the Jewish faith. Up to the year 2010, my family and friends knew very little about my experiences during the war. I kept my thoughts to myself. I did not feel that I was entitled to speak, that my story was not interesting to others. After all, I did not suffer physically at the hands of the Nazis. I had escaped the concentration camps. I was only what they call a hidden child. I knew that did not have a normal childhood, and I was left with emotional scars. But I kept silent. But I always remembered that era and the people who saved me. But in 2010, I became more and more aware and very angry about the amount of bigotry surrounding me. And some of it was directed towards France. So that's when I decided that I would write down what I remembered about the Holocaust, my life, and the French people who saved me. We call them the righteous Gentiles. And when I was finished writing, I knew that I would share it with anyone willing to listen to me. And this is what I wrote, and I remembered. I first recall the sirens blaring, and I'm running with my mother on an underground shelter because bombs are about to fall. We all have gas masks on and on our faces. And as a 5-year-old, I don't quite understand what is happening. I was terrified. And every time we went there to the shelter, it became more and more scary. The noise of the sirens, the people running, but also I remember hiding my face so that I didn't have to see those big, black ugly masks on their faces. I also know that we lived in a town called Nancy. This was a very large square where barracks had been erected and where my mother and I lived along with many other Jewish families. And what I know now was a makeshift ghetto. I don't remember much about these days, how I spent them. I cannot recall if I spoke or played with any other children. But what is very vivid in my head is my mother crying and sewing something on my garment, which I learned later was the Star of David. Also, I have a vision of 2 open trucks coming into the square and men being led into them. There were a lot of people crying around me. I didn't know then, but I found out later on after the war that these men were probably on the way to a concentration camp and death. In my own family, uncles and cousins, no man survived. At some point, we were no longer in Nancy, but I know that we were moving from town to town across France, from the northeast to the south, trying to escape the Germans. It is amazing to me that we were always one step ahead of them because there was always a brave person who would tell my mother that we were in danger and we needed to leave. I have no recollection on how we traveled across France or how at different places we stayed and for how long, except for that one time when my mother and I were in a rowboat. There also was a young boy in that rowboat by himself. It was dark, and a man was rowing, and my mother's hand was on my mouth so that I could not speak, make noise, because on the banks of the river there were German sentinels watching, ready to catch one of us. But we did make a turn. I often think of the young boy, wondering if somebody was there at the end to take him to a safe place. At some point, we were in the south of France, on the border of Spain, a town called Pau. And we lived with a family that sheltered us and fed us. I remember those days with very warm feelings. But I don't think we stayed there very long. And again, we were in danger and we had to leave. But this time, this family gave my mother the name of a mayor who lived in a little village named Le Grand-Bourg. It was a farming village with about 400 inhabitants near the town of Limoges. And that's where we spent the rest of the war. We actually lived in a presbytere where the priest lived in his own quarters, and my mother and I lived above the stables in a one room with a small window, one bed, a sink with cold water, also a coal-belly stove to keep us warm, and when my mother would cook our meals. There were no bathrooms available. That was across the yard. When it was warm, we bathed in the river with the soap that my mother made. Everyone else used to use the river to bathe and wash the clothes. No such thing as indoor bathrooms, washing machines, and all the convenient machines that I not take for granted. The presbytere also had a little small farm with chickens and rabbits, horses and cows, and a vegetable garden. And I milked the cows and I got the eggs from the chicken. I could not go to school. I was with my mother at all times, since the Germans would come in and they would come to the farms to gather some goods, some supplies. They would stay around for a while, and always my mother was told that they were coming. We would go to the mayor's attic and hide. Some Germans would also come to the mayor's and talk to him. We could hear their voices. And my mother would hold on to me, warn me not to make any sound. I had no idea what was happening, but I could see panic in her eyes. And that scared me. I wanted to cry, but I wasn't allowed. When I think about my mother, what she must have been terrified that any moment could have been the end of our freedom. When the Germans were not in town, in the village, life was quiet and very, very lonely. We would go to the different farms where my mother would order for the goods that we needed. And in exchange, she would make fresh pasta for the farmers and bake cakes and knitted garments. She also planted seeds in part of the priest's garden so we could grow some vegetables. I never went hungry. And I had to eat everything on my plate to make up for all the children who were starving. What has stayed for the rest of my life in me was a feeling of isolation. No one to talk to, no children to play with. My mother did not explain anything to me. She was always nervous and irritable and crying a lot. Did I do something bad? I was a child. I did not know. I did not understand why I was so different from other children. Why couldn't I go to school like them? Why couldn't I speak to anyone? At the farms, I watched the children play together. They were laughing, so why couldn't I join them? And then I would see people gathering by the church with their children all dressed up, and I could not be with them. It was as if an invisible wall was in front of me. There was no movie theater in the village. I did not have toys to play with, no radio to listen to, and never an explanation of why I was so different. What was wrong with me? After the war, I thought that maybe my mother had decided that it may have been better for me not to know. It may have been more terrifying if I had known the truth about being Jewish, the truth that the Nazis captured us and it would be concentration and death. The priest was an elderly, good soul, a great human being who never asked for me to go to church, never asked for us to change our religion. Sometimes he would sit with me and try to teach me how to read and write, count numbers. It was not every day, and I didn't have any books of my own, no lessons to study. So between the age of 5 and 10, this was the extent of my education. There was a cobbler who made wooden shoes for me. There were no leather shoes. There were no paved roads, no cars, only horses, cows, and a lot of manure. I remember a wedding taking place outdoors. People were dancing with music from the radio and having a good time. And again, I was separated by that invisible wall. I was not part of the festivities. I was in a different world, just watching. It was always the same questions and no answer. Why couldn't I have a good time and enjoy like everyone else? I wanted to laugh. I never heard the word Jewish mentioned. I only knew that soldiers were very bad, and they could not know that we were in the village. I was a hidden child, but yet everybody saw me. I was hidden in plain sight. All of the 400 villagers with babies, young children, and teenagers, all of the Catholic faith in a very tight-knit community had to know that we were Jewish, and that is why we were in their village, hiding from the Nazis with the help of the mayor and the priest. Nevertheless, they all decided to protect us at what could have been a horrific price. They want death. Later on, I found out that if one of them had told the Germans about us, chances are that the entire village would have been destroyed. But yet, in all that time, all the villagers kept quiet. Words like racism, anti-Semitism, bigotry, that was not part of their vocabulary. We were strangers, but they knew that we were the innocent victims of a cruel, unhuman regime. These villagers that we called the righteous Gentiles were humble people. No high education, just hardworking with compassion. They had a conscience, and they were amazing, courageous people. And they would be forever my heroes. So eventually, I heard the church bells ringing continuously, and I saw all the farmers running toward the square, and we were told the war was over. It had ended, but not before 6 million Jews had been exterminated, and a million more of all nationalities had perished. So soon after the war was ended, we said our goodbyes and we left for a town called Metz in the Northeast. And my mother had some families. I was 10 years old then, horrified and terrified of what looked like a big city with cars. I actually don't remember ever seeing a car before. And then there were soldiers in uniform walking in the street. Did I have to run from them and hide? No, these were uniforms that belonged to the Allies and the Americans. They were the good guys. But nothing to me made sense. I didn't understand any of it. For the first time, I went to school and I sat with other children, 10-year-old children, and I was completely bewildered. I did not have the skills to study at that level. I was 10 years old on my first day of school, not 5. And what other children had learned in these earlier years was foreign to me. Yet I was expected to adapt. By the way, my teacher either did not understand or did not care, and she implied that I was just lazy. Special programs for children like me did not exist then. I was on my own. My mother worked very, very hard to put food on the table, and she was always tired. She didn't understand that my needs were not being met. I had no one to turn to, no one to share my fears, my insecurities. School was a place where I felt especially out of place. I just could not follow and learn. It was so hard. So I became a truant most of the time. I walked the streets to pass the time. I felt like a fish out of water. I also went to Hebrew school for the first time and to a synagogue. And it was also terribly uncomfortable. There was no safe refuge for me anywhere. I was still very much alone. The war had left my mother emotionally scarred. She remained angry, unhappy, fought with everyone. My mother had survived the Holocaust, but for the rest of her life, she never found enjoyment or peace. So this was my new life, full of adjustments and trying to cope and understand. I finally learned that I was Jewish and what it meant, and learned about the war and the Holocaust. I did not suffer physically. And I was very grateful for it. I still am. But I was deprived of a normal childhood, where people, with children, develop skills that will be important for the rest of their lives. And it left a very big mark on me. So my only enjoyment after the war was to go to the movies with my mother and to watch American films and fantasize about living in the good old USA. I had 2 uncles and an aunt in Brooklyn. And when I was 17 years old, they made it possible for my mother and I to join them. At that point, I did not look back. I was excited. Everything was going to be just right. Everything was going to be so much better. It was the beginning of a new life. I was going to speak only English, become an American, and marry one. And that's what I did. By the mid-90s, I was able to go back to France. I needed to go and see the Grand-Bourg, the village that I have never really forgotten and that holds a very special place in my heart. My sister-in-law and I traveled, and I had emailed the mayor at that time for my visit, and she welcomed us with open arms. There was the present priest also there, and 2 reporters. And then there were some older women who remembered me when I would go to the farms with my mother. We spent a wonderful day with them. We went everywhere, including a few miles away to a chateau, where we were told the story of about 60 Jewish children who had found their shelter until a safe place could have been found for them. As adults, a large group of them came together to this chateau and commemorated that event by putting a large plaque on the wall, thanking that village for saving them. But Le Grand-Bourg was not what I remembered. It was no longer a farming village. Excuse me. Hello?
Solange, hello. Are you able to continue?
Yes, I pressed on the computer and I lost it.
No
I'm-
worries.
I'm sorry. So I did go back to France. And as I was talking about the chateau where 60 young Jewish boys were saved, as I said, the Grand-Bourg was not the same. Some 50 years later, there were no more farms. Hello? Are we having a problem?
No, I think you're fine. Please
Oh,
go
okay.
ahead. Please go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, I didn't see it. There were no more farms. Farms had replaced horses and cows, and aside from these two elderly women who greeted me, no one was there from the past. It had become a retirement community. As a parting gift, I received a picture of the church, and it has been hanging in my bedroom ever since. I constantly thank and honor all these righteous Gentiles who made it possible for me to grow older, have a son, two sons, three beautiful granddaughters, and now an adorable great-grandchild, and to live my senior years in a very safe place. That my mother and I escaped concentration camps and death was not because of a miracle. It was because of the decency, the courage, the responsibility that these righteous Gentiles felt for others. My mother and I were not one of them, but they knew that we were fighting for our survival. So each one of them, from the person who would warn my mother in different towns, to the person who brought us to safety, to the family in Pau, the villages in the Grand-Bourg, and probably many others that I am not aware of that crossed our path, all knew that the Nazi wanted to exterminate us. But they all know that they had a frightened mother and a young child fighting for their lives. We wanted to stay alive, and they needed to do it for us, and they came to our rescue. Thousands and thousands of Jews were also saved, fortunately, by many other good, courageous human beings who were willing to risk their lives to save another. I have 3 female cousins who were saved that way. So as I grew older and understood more of the world we live in, I realized how my mother and I owe our lives to these beautiful farmers, and that this is also their story as well as mine, their story of strength, courage, and love. They surely saved our lives, and I hope that I have tried to live mine by the same principles, that all of us have the basic right to be judged individually for ourselves and not for our actions, and not because we are from a different race, practice a different religion, or live a different lifestyle. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Solange, for sharing your incredibly moving story with us. You know, if we were meeting in person, you would be hearing over 130 people clapping and thanking you for sharing your incredible story. And right now we have about 10 minutes where we can do a question and answer session with the audience. And people can submit their questions by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of their Zoom screen. And we already have some questions. So let me pose them to you, Solange. The very first question is, did your mother ever talk about your experiences as you got older? And if so, was anything ever written or recorded from her point of view?
No, my mother never talked to me about it. She didn't really talk about it to anyone either, except to say what a horrible life she had, which she did. But we never went into details. She just didn't. My mother was not a communicator.
Thank you. Now, the next question is, thank you for sharing your experience. I would like to know if you ever had an opportunity to go back to the village that hid you and your mother. You might have mentioned some of that in your story, but if you would like to elaborate just a little bit more.
Yes, I did go back. And as I said, there were not too many people left there except for these 2. There were 2 or 3 elderly women who remembered me. I never spoke to them while I was there because I was not allowed, but they remembered me and my mother when we went to the farms so that my mother could bother and get food. And it was a wonderful experience. I just needed to do that. It was a closure that I needed to experience. Yeah.
Great. The next comment and question, this person writes, Solange, thank you for sharing your story. Bless the courageous people of the village where you stayed and saved your life. Can you please say the name of the village where you stayed? It was hard to understand you. And what helped you get on with living your life?
Yeah, the name of the village is Le Grand-Bourg, like Grand-Bourg, B-O-U-R-G. That's how it was spelled. Yes. And what was the end of the questions?
The other question was, what helped you get on with living your life?
I just had no choice. I just had to do it. I never really gave it a thought. But I think I love life and I just wanted to live it. Not easy, but yes.
I think it took a lot of courage to do that. Thank you. So here's another question. Thank you for sharing your story. When your children were born, did you experience anxiety and flashbacks to your own childhood?
No, no. I did not compare it to my own childhood. I was happy that they were in a country that was democratic, that they were going to grow up to be free men. They were going to certainly have a much better life than I ever had. And yes, it's all that a mother wants.
Well, here's another question. People are very interested in you. Please tell us about your husband and your life in America. And did you raise your children Jewish?
Yes, my children were raised Jewish. They went to a conservative temple. They had 5 years of religious study. And one is still very religious, the other one not so. But I gave them that education, yes. And, well, we won't talk about my husband.
Okay, another question is, what happened to your father?
My parents were divorced before the war, I suppose. And I have no idea where my father was during the war. And it's also something that really has nothing to do with the Holocaust that I would rather not talk about. But I didn't know my father at all. Never knew him.
So the next question is, do you still think about the Holocaust? Does it still affect you?
Yes, especially these days. Absolutely. I'm terrified for the future of my children, the future of my grandchildren. Yeah. When I watch TV, it's very scary. And I think about the Holocaust. But I think about all the anti-Semitism that is among us, and it scares me. Yeah.
Here's the next question. Thank you for sharing your life with us. Your words touched me deeply. What things did you do to help cope with the painful memories you have?
Yeah, it never really goes away. I am what I am because of my childhood. And as I say, I guess I'm someone who loves life and tries my very best to live it for the present. I wanted my children. I wasn't one that cried about the Holocaust and blame whatever happened to me on it. I tried to bring my children the best that I could. That's why they really never really knew about the Holocaust until they were not part of it, until they were adults. It's in me. And I do feel different than anybody else. I still do today. I still feel that I'm not part of something a lot of times. It stays with you, but then you go on to your daily life and keep going. Yeah.
Thank you. You know, the next question actually segues nicely. The question was, did you talk to your children about your experiences during the Holocaust? And you just mentioned you shared when they were adults.
Right.
But what was their reaction?
I'm not sure. They were there the first time I spoke to the public. And I don't I don't know that they really understood. They still saw me as who I was as a mother. I'm not sure that they got it. I know one of them said to me, "Did you write this by yourself?" And I said, "Yes." That was his answer to my speech. He was kind of amazed that I had written that because I don't have much of an education.
Wow, thank you.
Yeah, but I don't know that they, you have to walk in somebody's shoes to understand what they've gone through. And it just, I'm just their mother. I don't know.
Thank you for that. Here's another question. Thank you so much for sharing your harrowing life story. Do you know what happened after the war to the priest and the mayor who sheltered you and your mother?
They were elderly and they passed on, before I could even go back and see them. Yeah. Yeah. And actually, both of them didn't have children. Well, the priest didn't have a child. There was nobody there to talk afterwards. And neither did the mayor. So I couldn't connect with any of their descendants.
Okay. Here's another question. You mentioned that you were isolated from other children and people. How did you spend your days, and did you help your mother, or were you able to escape somewhat into your imagination?
Right now, I can understand how I spent, 24 hours a day or 12 hours during the daytime. All I know is I was alone. I was just alone. Yes, I wanted to play with other children. I wanted to talk to other children. I couldn't. I was alone, except for when I was with my mother, constantly, but I was really alone. Yeah, it's like if you put me in a cage and just leave me there, and that's it. I was alone. That has never left me.
Thank you. Are you in communication with other Holocaust survivors? Is there a sense of community there?
Yes, well, I do belong to the Jewish Federation of Orange County, and Laguna Woods has its own. We have our own little group here, and we're hoping to get bigger. We're starting a social club. And yes, I know, and I'm very active with the Jewish Federation as much as I can.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing. What, if any, thoughts do you have of the average German person at that time?
Then, well, and then I was 10 years old. I really just didn't. I really just, I found out about the Germans after the war. And I guess maybe at first I didn't want to have anything to do with anything that was German. I don't remember really. I know that I don't feel that way at all now. So I don't really know how I felt about the Germans at that time. I had other problems. At that time I was still very young, 10, 11, 12. I was just trying to live.
So what advice would you give to young Jewish people today?
Well, I love going to schools and talking about the Holocaust because they're the ones, after I'm gone, after all of us are gone, who are going to have to carry it. And tell the world about the Holocaust. It should never be forgotten. And no matter what it is that you do, just remember, as a Jew, you have the responsibility of carrying on what we are leaving behind. Yeah.
Thank you. And here's our last question. It's somewhat similar, but you may have additional things to say. This person writes, lots of hugs and love to you, Solange, for being a survivor and for bravely sharing your story. We love you. What message do you want to leave with us to ponder?
Well, when I try to tell my friends, don't put your head in the sand. Watch what is happening now. Be aware of your surroundings. Be aware of what is going on in the world. And try to do your little part whenever you can. Just be a good citizen. And judge everybody individually. Yeah, that's what I would say. That's what I would hope they would do.
What a wonderful way to end. I want to thank you so much, Solange, for sharing your story and your wisdom with us.
Well, thank you for having me.
We are so honored that you've been a speaker here.
Thank you.
And now I'll switch over to some closing remarks. The Americans and the Holocaust traveling exhibition, which again will be on display until March 9th, asks really tough questions about Americans' role in this part of history. And it prompted us to ask the question, what was happening in Orange County? How were we impacted by the war effort? And this inspired us to create a complementary exhibit called Snapshots of Orange County in the 1940s, Spaces, Places, Faces. And the exhibit explores the cultural and economic and political landscape of Orange County during that era. And it highlights the histories and experiences of diverse multicultural communities in Orange County, including a section on the Jewish community in Orange County during the 1940s. And I'd like to thank Dahlia Taft, the director of the Orange County Jewish Historical Society, for help with this section. The exhibit also shows how the introduction of Army and air bases brought soldiers and their families from all over the country to our region and changed the demographics and cultural norms. And for more information about this exhibit, please visit the link on this slide or scan the QR code using your smartphone. Now, this exhibit, Snapshots of Orange County in the 1940s, was curated by 4 librarians: Nicole Arnold, research librarian for student success and instruction; Cynthia Johnson, head of reference department and Grenigan Medical Library; John Sisson, research librarian for biological sciences; and Crystal Tribbett, who's the curator for Orange County Regional History and the research librarian for Orange County. And this exhibit will be on display through the fall in the Muriel Ansley Reynolds Gallery in the lobby of the Jack Langston Library, and it will be available during the regular building hours. Now, at this time, I would like to take a moment to thank our donors. It is through your generosity, through the UCI Libraries can present exciting events such as this traveling exhibitions and related programs, which support education and learning for the UCI campus and the community. And as you can see from this slide, there are many ways to support UCI Libraries, but let me highlight just one of them. Within the UCI Libraries Special Collections and Archives Department, we are proud to have over 120 oral histories of Orange County Holocaust and liberators, Holocaust survivors and liberators. And they were recorded in the early 1990s by the Anti-Defamation League of Orange County. Now, these oral histories are on VHS tapes. And so what we'd like to do is to digitize them and add transcriptions that will make their stories available online to the world. And if you would like to support the preservation of stories like the one that you've heard this evening, please consider making a gift to this project that will honor and provide access to these important oral histories. And to learn more, you can visit the link on the slide. Now, today's event is just one of 6 events we have planned in conjunction with the Americans in the Holocaust exhibition. And we hope you will join us next week for an author talk with Deborah Lipstadt on Wednesday, February 16th, noon to 1. It's on Zoom. Deborah Lipstadt is the Durow Professor of Modern Jewish History and Holocaust Studies at Emory University, and she's best known for having been sued for libel by David Irving, a Holocaust denier. After several years, she won her case, and she wrote a book about it called History on Trial: My Day in Court with a Holocaust Denier. And this was later turned into a feature film in 2016 called Denial. Now, in 2021, Professor Lipstadt was nominated by President Joe Biden to serve as special envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism. Her appointment is pending Senate approval, and we are so honored that she has agreed to discuss her latest book, Anti-Semitism Here and Now, at this event. So to register for this free event, please visit the link or scan the QR code. Next, on Thursday, February 17th, we will host a book talk with Jeffrey Weidlinger from 5:30 to 6:30 via Zoom. So Jeffrey is the Joseph Brodsky Collegiate Professor of History and Judaic Studies at the University of Michigan, and he will discuss his latest book, In the Midst of Civilized Europe, the Pogroms of 1918 to 1921. And Professor Weidlinger, he will share how the murder of Jews in the Ukraine during 1918 to 1921 was a chilling foreshadowing of the Holocaust. And he does this by drawing upon long neglected archival materials, thousands of newly discovered witness testimonies, trial records, and official orders. So to register for that event, again, please visit the link on the slide or scan the QR code. And now I'd like to extend a special thank you to the UCI Center for Jewish Studies and the Jewish Federation of Orange County for their partnership in this event series. And we are also very grateful for the support and collaboration with many other partners on campus, which is on the next slide. And thanks to the, on the next slide, thanks to the UCI Libraries team, the many library employees, current and past, who helped to make the traveling exhibition and public programs possible, deserve my thanks. And now a recording of this event will be posted in the UCI Libraries YouTube channel, and the link to this recording will also be included in a follow-up email. So thank you all for coming, and hope